From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. Dr. Michael Babcock, a professor of economics at Kansas State University with an expertise in transportation, has conducted a study to assess the state of the short-line rail industry and its role in the grain logistics system. According to the study, a majority of agricultural short-line traffic was concentrated in a few commodities, mainly corn, soybeans, and wheat. Babcock, along with K-State Radio Network's Richard Baker, take an extended look at the study. In agricultural news, K-State Extension Beef Specialist Dale Blasi has a reminder about tomorrow's Beef Stalker Field Day. We'll also pass along this week's soybean update. And K-State's Gus Vanderhoven talks about life on the Hill in his weekly commentary, Stop, Look, and Listen. It's all just ahead on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.
Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. Short-line railroads play a critical role in the grain logistics system. Dr. Michael Babcock, a professor of economics at Kansas State University with an expertise in transportation, recently conducted a study to assess the state of the short-line rail industry and its role in the grain logistics system. He surveyed short-line railroad managers and State Department of Transportation railroad personnel from 17 high-grain production states. He spoke with the K-State Radio Network's Richard Baker about his findings.
Babcock says understanding exactly what makes a short-line railroad is a bit complicated.
The short-line railroad is a branch line of the former Class 1 railroads, and in the West, there are two Class 1s, Burlington Northern Santa Fe, which merged the Burlington with the Santa Fe, and Union Pacific. The short lines are lines that the Class 1 didn't want anymore, so they either abandoned the line or they'd sell it to one of these short line operators. After the railroads were deregulated with the Staggers Act in 1980, they adopted a cost reduction strategy to get back to profitability, and so sales to a branch line track to short line operators was one way that they got rid of much of the branch line system. For the most part, a short line is, like its name says, it carries the traffic a short distance, gives it to a Class 1 railroad, and in general performs the gathering up function of the start of the supply chain for grain, since we're talking primarily about agricultural products. But the short line, for the most part, is a line that operates in one state. Not always, but for the most part, they're localized. So like in Kansas, we got 4 short lines that have been in existence for a long time. These are the Kyle Railroad that operates across the northern tier of Kansas counties. It was a former Rock Island line before the Rock Island went bankrupt. Then we got the Kansas and Oklahoma, which operates primarily in the middle of the state. We got southeast Kansas, which is like the name says, pretty much confined to the southeast. And then we got one in the southwest called the Cimarron Valley Railroad.
You talked about a Class 1. How many classes of railroads are there?
There are 3 classes. The Class 1 railroads, like I said, are the biggest railroads, the Union Pacific, Burlington Northern, Santa Fe. Due to mergers and other things, there are only 7 Class 1 railroads in the entire United States. Then the Class 2 railroads are fairly large railroads that can operate in 2 or 3 states. And then you got the the Class 3 railroads, which researchers count the Class 2 and the Class 3 as short lines.
A Class 3 railroad, a short line railroad, handles just or mainly agricultural products?
Mainly, but it varies. Take the Kyle Railroad. I don't know what the exact percentage is, but a very large percentage of their traffic is grain. They have a few manufactured products, but for the most part, that's it. But when we take the Kansas and Oklahoma, for example, they have lots and lots of non-agricultural traffic. But for the most part, if you look across the entire United States, most of the Class 3s are grain handling railroads. I had 47 short lines in this study. One of the things we looked at was equipment, and 2/3 of all of the track miles operated by short lines in the 17 states that I looked at, 2/3 of those track miles can handle any car, regardless of how heavy. But 1/3 of them can't handle all of the traffic that's becoming standard in terms of the Class 1 wants a big car. And in order to get the big car to the Class 1, you have to put it on a short line or a truck and bring it over to where the Class 1 railroad is. So if you're a short line and you can't operate, your infrastructure isn't geared to transporting those heavier cars even a short distance, and so it goes on a truck. But for the most part, that's being addressed where the short lines have come to the conclusion that in order to be around in another 10 or 15 years, I got to upgrade the line to handle a heavier car.
What kind of benefits does a short line in Kansas bring to the state?
For the most part, contributes to rural economic development. Farmers, if they have access to a railroad, maybe more than one railroad, is able to use Class 1 equipment so they can load a heavier car. So farmers have access to more markets, so they get higher prices for their grain at the elevator. If you avoid abandonment, you avoid a lot of negative problems, that employment declines, the town just kind of shrinks to the point where it's no longer functional.
If they don't have access to a short line, the alternative, I would assume, are trucks.
Yeah.
And that's more expensive or less expensive?
Depends on the length of the haul. If you have a haul, let's say, of less than 50 miles, then it's really very competitive between short lines and trucks. But if you go out 100 miles, rail will pretty much dominate all the traffic in that distance category. For the most part, trucks are short-haul carriers, rail, longer-haul carriers.
Now, I remember you telling me years ago that one of the advantages of a short-line railroad was that because they use the railroad instead of trucks, there's less damage to the highways. Is that still true?
Yeah, if short lines are viable, then there's less truck shipments. Less truck shipments means less road damage and savings for the state. We did a study on this years ago, and at that time, the short line system saved the state $50 million a year in perpetuity for keeping some trucks off the highways.
Do the short lines in Kansas make money?
I've been doing this kind of research for my entire professional life. I learned you don't ask anybody one question. They'll give you any kind of information you want. Don't ask me how much money I make. But just by casual observation of the real world, these short lines have been around a long time. If they weren't profitable, they'd be gone. But I don't know how profitable. Another thing, the general problem of the short line industry is maintaining and upgrading the infrastructure. all those fixed costs have to be covered at some point. So these short lines, a lot of them are undercapitalized, and they know they need to fix the bridge, but they haven't got the money to do it. Maybe they can get a loan from the state to fix it, but they're chronically short of capital funds to maintain the bridges and the roadbed.
Are the state and federal governments good at supporting short line railroads?
The federal government, their short line assistance programs have been limited to a small number of railroads, kind of a small budget. But the states do a pretty good job of assisting railroads with infrastructure, primarily taking the form of low-interest loans or maybe even no-interest loans, grant programs that don't require repayment. When you go through the list of benefits that the short lines confer to the state, those benefits aren't measured by the market or reward the railroads in any sense. So the government kind of fills that hole of lack of access to the capital markets and comes up with fairly extensive programs. Most of them are a revolving loan. They start off with a fund of X million dollars. They loan that out. Then as these first group of loans are repaid, they loan that out to another railroad and just keep going like that. But for the most part, those state assistance programs serve an important function.
That's Dr. Michael Babcock, a professor of economics at Kansas State University with an expertise in transportation. According to his study, the majority of agricultural short line traffic was concentrated in a few commodities, mainly corn, soybeans, and wheat. Following the break, we'll have more with Dr. Babcock and his study of short line railroads in high grain production states. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. As we continue our discussion with Dr. Michael Babcock, an economics professor at Kansas State University with an expertise in transportation and author of Profile of Short Line Railroads in High Grain Production States, he tells Richard Baker that states benefit from supporting short line railroads.
Local schools stays where it is. Local businesses don't board up the store and leave for greener pastures. If you have a railroad and trucks competing, then they lower the shipping cost going out of the area to markets. As a result, the town for the most part prospers. Or it can be a case of avoided loss. Kind of like our road example, that nobody gives the state $50 million. It's just $50 million they don't have to spend. So if you abandon the railroad, you abandon a lot of options for the local shippers shipping their products outside the area.
Is Kansas a good state for short line railroads?
Yeah, I think so. There have been 2 programs, kind of the revolving loan I described and a grant program have helped the short lines stay in business. They get various upgrade loans. So, yeah, I'd rate Kansas as a good state for short lines.
Do the Class 1 railroads go through Kansas?
Oh, yeah. Both Union Pacific and Burlington Northern Santa Fe have over 1,000 track miles, both of them in Kansas. I don't know exactly the exact numbers, but yeah, the freight railroads are a big part of the rail picture in Kansas.
Do you have any idea what percentage of freight goes by rail?
Well, the railroad, in the Class 1s, specialize primarily in what we call bulk commodities, things like grain, ores, coal, a variety of other manufactured products, but mainly they ship relatively low value per unit weight commodities going a long distance in a large volume. That's their cleanup position.
These trucks that we see on the highway, are they going short distances? Are they going long distance? Do they try to compete with the railroads?
They try to compete, but most of the competition is between short lines and trucks, because the Class 1 railroads, most of their shipments, like I said, are long haul. And the cost structure of trucks as it's going up with distance pretty much in a lockstep linear fashion. So the farther you get out, the higher the truck price is, therefore the less competitive they are.
And with the railroad be just the opposite?
Yeah.
I'm not sure you can answer this. How much does the cost increase to ship things by truck over railroads?
There's so many situations and variables, I wouldn't hazard a guess on that. Higher, the farther you go, the greater the distance of the haul. Truck prices go up, and at some point they become uncompetitive, and the traffic starts going rail. I did another study years ago on the impact of the Mississippi River on rail traffic, and if you're close to the river, everything will go by truck. If you're 50 miles or less from the river, that's their cost advantage on those short hauls. But if you go back 300 miles from the river, trucks aren't in that market. That's all short line to the river.
So the trucks are taking things to the barges on the Mississippi.
Yeah. Or if the shipper's close to the river. And the study, as I recall, was they were going to put a user fee on diesel fuel to raise the cost of barging, because up to that point, all of the barge infrastructure costs, the lock and dam system, that was paid by the federal taxpayer. So 1980, they said, well, that really isn't fair. Let's require the barges to pay something. So it started out at 20 cents a gallon. So all these studies started coming out on what's that going to do to railroad and truck traffic. And as I recall, all it did was kind of widen that band that the river has around it for trucks, so that you had to go out a greater distance for it to shift over from truck to rail. So if you're a railroad, you want to get away from the water because a lot of it's going to go by truck on the short distances.
Now, do short-line railroads in Kansas go into other states, or do they have to stay in Kansas?
The Kyle Railroad has tracks going all the way out to Denver, where they interchange with Burlington Northern Santa Fe. The Cimarron Valley in southwest Kansas has a few branch lines down into the Oklahoma Panhandle. And the Southeast Kansas Railroad over in the southeast has a line going down to Tulsa. So they can be in a neighboring state, but not beyond that. We don't have any examples of that. Then they'd be a Class 2.
As you look into the future, are there problems you see in the offing?
Well, a principal problem for short lines is how to stay competitive in the current logistics system. See, the way it works is that the Class 1 railroad lines up 100 cars to ship grain to Houston, let's say. But in order to have enough grain to ship 100 cars, the elevator, and they're specially designed for high-speed loadout, the elevator has to get it there. And in most cases, or well, in some cases, it's becoming more and more difficult for the short line to compete with the truck, since the trucks are competitive on short hauls. So are short lines going to be viable in the future? I don't know. They're under competitive pressure because of the changes in the grain logistics system to reward 100-car trains of grain going to various destinations. They don't want to line up 3 or 4 cars and take them someplace. They want a high-volume shipment. Remember, that's one of their main cost advantages is on a long haul. Line up 100 cars, take them nonstop to the destination, turn around and go back and do it again. If the short line is a long enough distance away from the shuttle train loader, that's what we call them, then they're good. But it gets real competitive if you're 20 miles away.
If we lose short lines, would I be right in saying we're going to see some prices for us go up?
For the most part, transportation cost is pretty efficient. So if you get a change, say the cost goes up by 5 cents a bushel or something like that, start spreading that over millions of people, I don't see it having a big price effect.
Do you see, as you look down into the future again, do you see some things that are looking good for short lines?
Just the fact that they seem to be pretty durable in terms of how long they've been in business. Between 1980 and 2010, the number of track miles under short line ownership increased by 600%. So there's got to be a lot of positives in there that you wouldn't see this kind of growth that's taken place. So there are challenges, but for the most part, I see short lines being with us for the long-term future. To the extent 1980 to 2010 was the long-term future, and that they came through that just fine, even expanded. Entrepreneurs are pretty good at finding a niche that they can stay in and be profitable.
That's Kansas State University economics professor Michael Babcock. He says that future research is needed to conduct a deeper assessment of the competition between short lines and trucks, as well as research to better understand the role of multi-short line holding companies in grain transportation. Dr. Babcock spoke with Richard Baker. This reminder to listen to the podcast version of Agriculture Today, visit agtoday.net, agtoday.net, or using an app on your mobile device, type these search keywords, Agriculture, Today, Kansas, and you'll find this program. By tapping the subscribe button, brand new episodes of Agriculture Today will automatically arrive on your device. That's agtoday.net. This is the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
You're listening to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. I'm Jeff Wickman. In today's agricultural news, quality stocker production strategies, cattle pain management, livestock theft, and a panel discussion on how silage fits in growing diets are among the topics planned for the 2018 Kansas State University Beef Stocker Field Day taking place tomorrow at the Beef Stocker Unit. K-State Animal Sciences and Industry Professor and Beef Cattle Extension Specialist Dale Blasi says this year marks the 19th Beef Stocker Field Day.
And we're rather proud of it from the perspective of addressing a very important segment, that being the stocker receiving and backgrounding segment of our industry. And of course, our program always starts off with an economic outlook, and this year Dr. Glenn Tonzer, our own here in the Department of Ag Econ, is going to talk about the role of stocker production expectations in terms of cattle buying decisions. And then another big component of the program is a producer panel. We always try to get producers that address issues amongst their peers. And this year we're going to talk about why silage fits in my growing diets. There's a lot of debate out there, and some people swear by the use of silage, whereas others are able to perhaps skip by. But we thought it would be a very timely topic for producers to discuss. Frank Harper from Sedgwick, Gary Burgess from Wamego, and Gary Bacon out of Minneapolis, Kansas, along with our own K-State Emeritus Professor Keith Bolson, are going to be on the program. So we're rather excited about that.
Blasi says that the afternoon session is filled with a variety of guest speakers and presentations.
Well, we have our own Hans Kutsia, DVM out of Kansas State. He's made a big name for himself internationally in terms of pain management of cattle. In fact, Hans conducted a trial at the stocker unit this last year. We're excited to have his participation on the program. I also managed to twist the arm of Dr. Justin Sexton out of Certified Angus Beef to talk about quality stocker production considerations. And then, after a short break, I brought in a really interesting person, more on the industry side, a guy from Performance Livestock Analytics who has some rather unique, novel cattle feeding technology, and he's going to talk about the tech revolution, Wall Street, baseball, and the cattle industry, and I'm looking forward to his comments. Then we also have Dr. Jason Nickel. He's a K-State vet school graduate. He's going to talk about rethinking BRD diagnosis. And then we have Mr. Kendall Lothman. He's a special agent out of the Office of the Kansas Attorney General. He's going to talk about livestock theft. He's got some really good information to address, and we've done some things at the stocker unit to protect the interests of the cattle that we have maintained there, and we look forward to sharing that with producers. And last but not least, my colleague, Dr. A.J. Tarpoff, is going to talk about treatment failures that are not BRD related. Dr. Tarpoff has spent a number of years as a beef veterinary consultant in Alberta, Canada, has a wealth of experience for his age, and we're really excited to have him on the program.
The deadline for the early registration has already passed. However, on-site registration is available tomorrow for $35. For more information on K-State's Beef Stocker Field Day, visit ksubeef.org or contact Lois Schreiner at 785-532-1267. Planting cover crops for grazing can provide additional forage options, and strategically choosing a species or combination can additionally benefit the ground being grazed. K-State Cropping Systems agronomist John Holman encourages producers to consider these options and weigh what might work well for their individual operations.
What we recommend is having a base plan in place where your yield may be a little more conservative. Maybe start out with an average expectation of what your long-term forage yields might be, but then have an alternative plan in place where we do experience occasional drought. But then when we do have these real excellent years, how can we bring in more cattle or take advantage of that extra crop and maybe put some of that up as baled hay or silage to carry over for the next year when it may turn dry.
Holman also says that species selections are a critical consideration when planting a cover crop for grazing.
The type of crop you might select depends largely on the time of the year that you would be planting. So let's just look at this fall. We need to be looking at some cool season species, which might include winter wheat, possibly as a dual purpose use, where we might get some grazing on that this fall, early spring, and then take it to a grain crop.
That's K-State Cropping Systems agronomist John Holman. And finally, in today's agricultural news, here's this week's soybean update.
Dr. Kevin Donnelly, professor of agronomy at Kansas State University, joins us. Dr. Donnelly, the Kansas State Fair recently took place, and they had a soybean plant judging competition that took place during the fair.
It's been a very popular exhibit, actually, in the crops division, and so the Kansas Soybean Commission sponsors that, and we were fortunate to be selected to judge, and so there is a good amount of premiums that are awarded for that as well.
Who were the winners of the maturity groups, and who was the overall champion?
Our results for this year, our overall champion was actually from the maturity group 3, Mindy Young from Lancaster. We did have more entries in the 4s, but it was an exceptional sample and probably moved it to the top. So the top winners in Class 3 were Mindy at Lancaster. The top winner in the Class 4 was Ray Ladd from Effingham.
What were the overall takeaway messages from this year's entries?
I think part of the challenge, both for selecting plants and for judging them, there's so much variability in soybean plants in a field down the row. A lot of that is influenced by plant population and so forth, and we're trying to judge these for visual display of what is a really robust plant. Those unfortunately may not always reflect final yield in the field because soybeans have a great ability to adjust. If they're at higher populations, they tend to be less branched plant. Even if there's good pod set, there's not necessarily a lot of pods per plant. If they're out by themselves, they turn into kind of a bushy tree and look like they have a lot more plants. So we kind of try to keep that in mind. You know, if we have a reasonable population, we should generally see a little bit of branching, and that gives us a little more robust plant with more pods per plant. For potential future contestants, probably pull up more than just 5 and kind of screen them looking for ones that are sort of uniform and have that good pod set. That's the main thing we're looking for.
And how did the soybean pods look this year?
We had some really nice samples. Good pod set all the way from bottom to top of the plant. We had a lot of drought stress early in the season, at least in some areas of the state, but some of the later ones maybe were a little short on pods toward the bottom, but even some of those are setting quite a bit now at the top. But we did have some really nice samples with good robust plants that had good pod set all the way up.
That's Dr. Kevin Donnelly, professor of agronomy at Kansas State University, who joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update.
And that's a look at today's agricultural news. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today.
Stop, look, and listen. This is our state, Kansas.
I looked in the paper to see what time sundown was that evening.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
Okay, just like everywhere else, there are good days and not so good days here on the Hill. I'm not talking about health issues, even though we get our share of those. I'm talking about other things. This is what happened last week, and it is an example. Anneke went to an evening meeting in town, which ended at 7:30 p.m. She got into her car to drive home, so she thought. Soon after she left the parking lot, she noticed a police car with lights blinking behind her. She quickly checked her speed, but she was not speeding, and since everyone else was driving by, she kept driving. Then when she heard sirens, she looked for a place to pull over and get out of the way. As she stopped her car, the police car, Campus Police, pulled up behind her. As the young officer approached her car, she rolled the window down. The officer asked for the usual: driver's license, car registration. All was in order, as it should be. Kind of surprised, Anneke asked, "Why was I pulled over?" And the officer replied, I pulled you over as you were driving without your lights on. But Anneke noticed not many other drivers had lights on, and by the way, she did have her small lights on. The officer explained that after sunset, lights are required. We all know that rule, even though not everyone follows it to the letter. But notice, Anneke had her small lights on. But there's more. She drove away after the meeting, which ended at 7:30 p.m. Soon after that she was pulled over when she realized the patrol car, was following her. I looked in the paper to see what time sundown was that evening, and the paper said 7:48. That would be 18 minutes after leaving the parking lot. The sun was not yet down, at least not here in Manhattan, even though it was a somewhat overcast evening. When Anneke explained that it was not dusk yet, and many cars passed without lights on, the officer continued. I'm letting the lights go, but must give you a ticket for not immediately pulling over when an emergency vehicle comes up behind you or meets you. And that clinched it. He was an emergency vehicle. By the time she got home, she was truly shook up. When she came in, I asked how badly the car was dented. But it was not the car, she explained, but the police. The ticket, hardly readable, shows $90 for the failure to stop and another $95 for court costs. Digesting all that, you wonder. However, I was not there, and you're supposed to love your wife as well as your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, and all the in-laws. But sometimes it is tough to do that. And by the way, yes, you have to love police officers. Then, as the week wore on, my riding mower gave me the fits. The oil plug on the mower is not a secure screw type, but closes with a bayonet closer. You slip it forward, turn it, and the drain is closed. Apparently while moving it loosened and opened, allowing the oil to drain and splatter all over the engine. A bloody mess. At a certain moment the engine conked out. When I lifted the hood, steam rose and I walked away. I've learned, as I got older, that walking away is a wise thing to do. Many years ago I should have done that in Australia when there my old farm tractor would not start. That was not a good moment. Soon after that the farm bought a new Fortune. What a pleasure it was. It started. I did a lot of thinking about my garden tractor. I talked to my mechanical inclined son, and he gave good advice and much sympathy. Remember, he took the old John Deere farm tractor home. He took it completely apart, rebuilt the engine, and now it starts like new. Of course, it does have a few new parts. Working on my garden tractor with patience, I removed the yellow hood so I could get at the parts easier. I took parts off, clamped the fuel line. There's no shut-off valve. I took the oil filter off after draining the remaining oil. I looked at it and studied both parts and remembered how one would unscrew the housing and simply replace the filters. Then I put the housing back on with clean filters. I know I'm getting old. To be sure of what I was doing, I dropped by a friend who knows. He said, "That's how it is done now, Gus." I bought the parts I needed, as well as oil for the engine. Anneke had been very wise not to call for coffee or tea as the day progressed. I was busy. I was dirty with oil, gasoline, smell, grease, and mud. I stank, and I knew it. I also tend to get impatient when very busy. But then when she did come out, I straightened up my back and looked up when she said, "There's a snake in the basement." But she immediately added, "But don't worry, I took care of it." The thought flashed through my mind, and I asked, "How did you do that?" I visualized a smashed snake head. But she explained, I picked up the 2.5-foot snake behind the head and held the tail and took it outside and let it go down the bank among the rocks. Wow. That's my wife, picking up a live snake and gently taking it outside to set it free. I straightened up some more and I told her, I admire you. You did a hell of a good job picking up the snake and releasing it. That is fantastic. I bent over and continued working on my small tractor. It started, then stopped, started again, then stopped again. But with a wife who handles snakes, why worry about a garden tractor?
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas.
And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.